Hello, and welcome to my tutelage. My name is Madeline. That's Hannah Moore. This is Jane Austen, so the gang's all here. I believe that education shapes the whole person. So the books that you read or don't read, the tasks that you perform or avoid, the music you listen to, the music you create, all of this contributes to the person you are becoming. And a society of thoughtful, patient, sacrificial people doesn't just happen. Education either makes it so or obstructs it. Enter Twilight, or more specifically, enter a dream that I had about Twilight the other night. I dreamt that my husband and I were talking to a family of vampires about how a classical education could help them live more virtuously, and how a classically educated human, if infected, would find it easier to not drink human blood. I think we hoped that they'd fund some classical schools, since vampires are invariably filthy rich, and it was very funny, but it did get me thinking. For those who never read or watched the Twilight saga in its heyday, the vampires of its world crave human blood, but they can resist that evil impulse and drink animal blood instead. Unlike the vampires of Dracula or Buffy, they're not demonic. They can retain their humanity if they deny their thirst. Fairy tale and fantasy fans debate the mutability of tropes like this. Traditionalists say that witches and ogres and dragons are wicked, and attempts to humanize them undermine the whole point of what a monster is. And revisionists point out that stories sharing a different side of these classic villains can teach lessons about human prejudice and the fact that people can change. Personally, I lean toward the traditional side. I don't think that you should rip off somebody else's character in order to pity their villain. Grendel from Beowulf is not just misunderstood. He literally eats people. And Maleficent calls herself the mistress of all evil in Disney's original Sleeping Beauty before the 2010s retelling. So, changing the villain in a fundamental way to tell a very different story undermines that whole premise of the first story, and it doesn't really make the character or the story any stronger. Even so, I like reinventing an old trope in a new way if it tells a good story about humanity. Now, Twilight, by and large, does not do this. It has been rightly mocked for its unhealthy relationships and wet lettuce protagonist Bella, but the concept behind the angst is pretty compelling to me. Does a monster have to be monstrous? Imagine, if you will, a world with vampires, where innocent people can be killed or infected through no fault of their own. And if you're in the world of Dracula, then I'm sorry, if you've been infected, we have to drive a stake through your heart because you're now demonically possessed. One solution. But if you're in a world like Twilight, there's a more complicated moral problem. So let's leave out the attractive aspects of the Twilight vampires. You're not really hot, you're not wealthy, you're not a superhero, you don't have telepathy, you don't sparkle, but keep the fact that vampires can refuse to drink blood. In such a world, you'd naturally strive to keep you and your loved ones safe from the vampires, but I think you'd also think about the creature you could become if you were infected. You would do all you could to ensure that that version of you would not drink human blood. You'd start learning to control your impulses now. For one thing, a cookie at 9 a.m. would mean a lot more than a few calories. It would mean a weakened will. Likewise, you'd practice doing hard things like advanced math, or physical labor, or learning a musical instrument, both for their own sake and because it would strengthen your willpower. You'd want to make sure that you never forgot about the worth of any human being, so you'd read tons of classic novels which have been proven to increase empathy. You would read stories by people all over the world. You'd try to have friends from different races, ethnicities, age groups, religions, orientations, because you wouldn't want to carry any bigotry with you into being a vampire and then justify it's okay to kill this group because they're less human. You'd practice putting others first. You'd confront your selfishness. You'd value patience and compassion and take care not to lash out at anybody in your family or anybody who annoys you, because you would know that that lashing out would be much more violent as a vampire. You'd feed hungry people. You'd help people with addiction, not just to be kind to them, but also to learn how little control you have over your actions when you're very hungry or when you are desperately craving something. You'd consume music and TV and art that challenged you to greater virtue rather than justifying your pet vices or comparing you to people who behave worse. And if you had a religion, you would seek greater faith so that you could trust your God to bear such a great burden as the desire to kill another person. You'd teach all of this to your children too. You'd realize that the safest society would be one whose vampires could avoid drinking blood. So you'd start schools that would shape good character. You'd go to the vampires themselves, trying to help them be more human for their sake and for yours. And now we have a to-do list. Now we have a place to start becoming better people in our own world. We may not have to worry about vampires, I think. But we still bear the consequences of ignorance, irrationality, and selfishness. You don't have to look far to find people who can't argue patiently, who refuse to actually listen to each other. And by the way, you've only effectively listened to someone if you can articulate your opponent's argument as well as they can, and then explain why you disagree. And that's a vanishing skill. Impulse control is disappearing. As adults in an affluent society, we can indulge desires very quickly, but that doesn't mean that we should. We can avoid physical exertion as a matter of course, but we damage more than our physical bodies when we do so. In the Twilight world, a toddler vampire would stay a toddler forever, trapped with their impulses and their runaway emotions, adorable, but vicious and utterly miserable. And I see in myself that temptation to a lesser degree, but I don't always want to grow. I want to be able to excuse my weaknesses. And growth requires education. And by education, I don't just mean reform and school choice and budgets, although all of those things should be considered. I mean my education as an adult, right now, every day. Every decision I make determines who I am. Do I engage with ideas I dislike, or do I avoid thinking about them? If I engage, do I think carefully, or do I let my emotions rule me? If I argue with someone, am I rational or am I volatile? Am I respectful or am I hurtful? Do I deal with bad feelings by confronting them, or do I find something to consume? Media, entertainment, food, alcohol. This is tea, but even tea. Something to consume until the feeling goes away. Are the things that I say and do going to last? Or would it have been better if I had never done them or said them at all? I believe that we engage best with our present world by occasionally disengaging in order to read great books, to play music, recite poems, pray, make things with our hands, not to escape from reality, but because we are all in a fight right now, and we will only be fit for the fight if we are trained by something other than the current climate. So yeah, I think that Nate and I would be trying to pitch classical education to a group of vampires. And for you non-vampires out there, if you are interested in learning more about classical education, please let me know. I love to talk about it and would love to continue the series as well as the other ones. That's all for now. How would you change the way that you are living if you lived in a world with vampires? And what sort of lessons are you going to put into practice now to help you become more human? If you like this video, please subscribe, and until next time, this has been my tutelage.